Welcome to another episode of Fantasy Reality. And in this episode, let's take a look at the three main types of adventurers who tend to team up in your typical adventure. They are the fighter, guy that likes to use melee weapons, the mage, the guy that likes using magic spells, and the archer, who likes to use his bow and arrow. These three have been a staple of most fantasy stories, video games, role-playing stories. They've been a common staple for decades, if not longer, of your typical fantasy adventure. But let's take a look at these guys. Your typical fighter, he's going to be carrying a big sword, maybe a big shield. He's going to be wearing plate armor. Okay. Let's look at your archer. Let's hear. He's got his bow. He's got a quiver full of arrows. He's wearing what looks like a leather vest, and he's probably wearing green because he was raised up in the forest, knows how to camouflage, blend in, yada yada. And then you have the mage. He's wearing some sort of robe. He's got a big staff. But is any of that realistic? That's a good question. Your fighter wearing full plate armor. Depending on when you set this, it's plausible that, yeah, he's going to be wearing plate armor. But what if he's just traveling? Well, a couple of others have answered this question, and the answer is most likely not. He's not going to be wearing full plate armor, though. He's probably going to be wearing something more akin to gambeson. That is a really thick, it's like wearing a really thick winter coat, basically. It's like a quilted, it's basically a lot of quilted, well, I'll be honest, there's a couple words I'm not quite sure how you describe it, because personally I've never worn the stuff, but it's like wearing apparently it's like wearing a quilted winter coat. It's real thick, protects you from the elements, and apparently does decent protection again from most weaponry. And basically, odds are, your fighter, he's going to be wearing that. The archer, odds are, he's going to be wearing that too. And the mage, he's probably going to be wearing that too. Unless there's a reason. I'll get to those in a little bit. At least while traveling. Of course, if he's about to go into a place where he knows that combat is unavoidable, yeah, he's going to switch into his plate armor. And your archer, again, they like to depict him wearing some sort of leather vest, but most likely he's probably going to be wearing gambeson himself. But could he be wearing something that's a little bit more protective? Yeah, it's possible. He could be wearing plate armor himself, or at least a variation on it that does as good of a protection as full plate would. You might, depending on the situation, you might limit it to like the upper. You might limit it to like his chest and his back. That's possible, with some other things helping out his legs so that way he can at least move around. I can see that being factored in. And your mage, well, again, gambeson, it's possible he's wearing that. And again, full plate armor, again, he could also be wearing that as well. But there might be some reasons why he isn't wearing full plate armor. Because maybe if you're wielding magic, and it turns out wielding magic while wearing a full plate armor is essentially like the same as turning yourself into a living lightning rod, then maybe wearing full plate armor is a bad idea. But the Gambison, that might be more possible. Although if you gotta do certain fine movements, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm wearing winter coats because it's Western New York here. We get winters that are just a lot of snow. And yeah, I've worn, snow suits and whatnot. But you can at least do a reasonable amount of maneuvering. So that's a little bit of a give and take. You gotta do something real fine. Maybe he's not gonna be wearing a Gambison. But it wouldn't be implausible for him to be wearing such an outfit. And of course, this thing falls down. But, like I said, he could be wearing this Gambison. Or, smarter idea. If he can't wear, in the case he can't wear Gambison because it obstructs his fine movements, he might just as well as enchant the usual clothes he's wearing, which would actually be much smarter. Although you might still want to bring your Gambison along for the off chance you might want to protect yourself from a mundane attack during a moment where you can't use magic, and at least long enough for you to get behind the two guys who are wearing the armor, so that way you can take off your armor, so that way you can wield those lightning bolts. But let's take a look at, could these guys cross-train? I mean, can your fighter, can he learn how to use a bow? Or could he learn how to use magic? Well, magic, that's one of those tricky things. And likewise, let's take a look at your archer. Could he learn melee fighting, or could he learn magic fighting? Well, magic, there's usually some sort of internal justification as to how many people can use magic. It might be something like 1% of 1% of people manifest the ability to use magic, which kind of limits the number of people. Well, like I said, limits the number of people who can use magic. But even so, I can see a certain amount of cross-training where, like say, maybe the guy is weak with magic, but is really good with archery, or is really good with his sword. I can at least see him knowing a few basic magical abilities, such as how to heal somebody. If you know how to use healing magic, okay, you're good. If you know how to use like a basic lightning spell, useful. That's kind of useful. They're just basic. Don't even need to have a whole lot of high level magic for the most part to know how to do a healing spell. Keeps you alive, keeps your party members alive, especially if you're dedicated healers down and out for the count. You might want to know how to heal your healer, Yeah. Useful thing to know. But yeah, I can see a healer, an archer, and a meat fighter. I can see if they have the ability to use magic, I can see them at least learning the basic heal spells and maybe a few attack spells. And I can see them doing that. Or maybe they use the magic to enhance their own fighting styles. Perhaps for the archer, I can see him enchanting his bow and his arrows so that he can hit a target that's like 1,000 yards away. That's quite impressive, considering that you're dealing with a bow and arrows, which you're lucky to hit, which are lucky to make it out to 100 yards. 1,000? You'd have to be a sniper. You'd have to be a really good sniper with a really good dedicated long-range rifle. After all, 1,000 yards, that's, my math might be a little off, about 1/5 of a mile. Then let's take a look at your, well, I might be, like I said, I might be off with the math, but it's still a good distance. So, I mean, 10,000 yards, that's the length of 100 football fields. Well, American football fields, that is, roughly. Depending on how, well, football fields, 100 yards, let's go with that. And likewise, for your fighter, I can see him enchanting his sword, so that way it could cut through things. I could see him do that. And I could see both of them possibly enchanting their own armors. Still a little windy. I can see them, like I said, I can see them enchanting their armors so that way they can protect themselves better in a fight. Not myself. Wear my hat more often. Like I said, they probably enchant their armors to protect themselves in a fight. But as for like I said, I can see them at least learning a few magic spells so that they can throw around lightning balls and whatnot. Likewise, your Mage, and as for your Mage, and of course, let's take a look at the archer learning how to use a sword, and let's take a look at, well, most of your archers in real life, they're actually going to be pretty strong in their shoulders, and upper body. So having these guys utilize something like a two-handed sword, yeah, they would use that. In fact, in real life, when the English had their longbowmen in the field of fight, out on the field to fight the enemies, most of these guys would at the very least carry an axe or a warhammer or some other melee weapon, because once those guys get too close for you to use your bow, you want to have something to hit them with. Now, as for your fighter learning how to use a bow, well, like I said, fighter learning how to use a bow, well, again, your fighters, they're going to be pretty strong most of the time. They're going to be decently strong. So, learning how to use a longbow, I can see them being okay with it. I mean, I don't expect them to be real good. I mean, I don't see them being as real good enough that they're going to hit the target in the eye 100 yards out. No, I don't see them doing that. On the other hand, I can at least see the potential that, hey, they might, even if they miss the guy that they're aiming at, they might hit the guy next to him. And even if they don't, and even if they miss that, and even if it isn't a kill shot, I can at least see them injuring somebody, which might put that person out of the fight. So it's like, okay. I mean, they may not be able to use their bow and arrow real effectively to take out a single target, but when the enemies are grouped, yeah, I can see them being able to use their bows in such a way that they can at least cause a certain amount of harm to an injury to a random enemy combatant. And now let's take a look at the mage. Could he benefit from learning how to use a melee weapon or a bow and arrow? Well, this one's a kind of a tricky one. If he's grown up using archery, like the longbow, yeah, I could see him using the bow to supplement his magic. And as for using the swords, again, I could see them also, learning how to use some sort of melee weapon. In fact, there's one melee weapon that every wizard, or at least a stereotypical wizard, already has with them. Do you know what that is? It's that staff thing. It's a big stick. It's a really big stick, guys. I mean, seriously, how hard is it for them to go, okay, let's do this 5 minutes. Uh-oh, enemy coming right up on me. I don't have enough time to utter this spell. Well, you know what's going to happen to that guy who's coming up right to them? Now, let me finish this fire spell. That's... Oh, it flamos! There, that took care of 30 of them. Oh, you had something to say, buddy? I just knocked out. Like I said, they got that staff, and a staff is a big stick, and most of us know how to use a stick to hit people with. I mean, seriously, the stick, world's oldest weapon. It's a club. You hit people with them. So, a wizard using his staff to hit somebody with it? Yeah, I could see them using their staff in that manner. Kind of comes up in at least a few occasions in some works where the guy is trying to figure out, okay, I need a cut, where perhaps it turns out that there isn't enough time for them to utter the spell, or uttering a spell is not practical. They use their staff, hit the enemy with it. At the very least, you could, and you knock the guy out. You could at least say, well, at least I didn't barbecue him. And now as for learning all 3, well, there have indeed been cases where, in some literatures, where you do have guys who learn magic, learn how to use a sword, and know how to use a bow and arrow. A case in point of this would be Aragon from the Inheritance series, because he grew up using the bow for hunting. He learned how to use a sword. He also learned how to use magic. And I'm certain that there's other guys who have other fantasy characters who learned how to use magic, swords, and archery. But those are the 3 that come to my mind. Well, he's the one that comes to my mind at the moment. let's see here. And another, well, actually, another one that could come to my mind is Maelstrom Ridicoli from the Discworld series. This guy, he's the head of the Unseen University, which is basically wizarding school. You know, if you're learning the magic and you're a male, you go to Unseen University and you'll learn magic. And Maelstrom, he's basically the head guy of this place. And oh boy, this guy, whoo, you do not want to mess with him in a fight, because one, he can throw fireballs. It's just usually a bad idea, which is one reason why it's a bad idea to mess with him. Second reason, this guy, he is an avid hunter and likes to use his crossbow a lot while hunting. So like I said, he's got the magic covered, he's got the archery covered. And as for the fighting part, this guy takes boxing, lessons. And one of the guys he likes to fight with, he tends to apparently, and he likes to wrestle around with, is the Unseen University's librarian, who is an orangutan. And it's usually a bad idea to be on the wrong end of an orangutan, especially one who can be. Well, this guy, has a few tricks that. There's a good reason why no one calls the orangutan a monkey. Uh-oh. He ain't here, is he? He also gets into boxing competitions with Deitrice. And Deitrice is a troll, and trolls in the Discworld are made out of rock. And fighting a rock, not easy. And Deitrice, he's probably one of the toughest trolls around. Although there's been one other person who's been able to defeat him. And that would be Carrot, who apparently has a punch that any troll can respect. Now, to be honest, I can't. Now, how about now sword, and then now let's use swordsman and magic. Well, one would be James Eckhart of the Dragon Knight series. Although, to be fair, he's not real good with a sword. He's just decent with it. Decent enough that if somebody attacks him, that's the weapon. The sword is the one weapon. That's his go-to weapon to protect himself against an attack. And also the kind of magic that he utilizes, at least within his world, is stuff that's more like healing, is illusion, teleporting himself around, casting a shield. It's mainly defensive in nature, because there's two types of magic in that universe. There's the good magic, which everybody calls magic, and then there's counter magic, which isn't their magic. This is offensive magic. It's used for killing, basically. And, this one where you cast fires is just I'd have to double check the book, but it's kind of used for offensive purposes only. And it can't really be used for defense. Whereas real magic is solely about defense. And, of course, another thing James Eckhart happens to have up his sleeve is the fact that he's the Dragon Knight, and he can turn himself into a dragon. He can't do fire breathing, but still, you see a dragon, you show him in front of you, it's like, where's my brown pants at? You know. And let's see. But as for guys that use bows and swords, well, let's look at Robin Hood. The guy, you know, I mean, let's take a look at the Kevin Costner movie from the early 90s. You know, the guy, he's basically an ousted knight. Apparently he was a knight who got, who, for one reason or another, came home and found out that his castle is no longer his. And, well, he's very famous for using his bow to make a lot of trick shots. He's also good with his sword. That's what he uses a lot. You know, sword and bow. Another character I could see that used the bow and sword is Navarre, played by the late Grothauer. I'm certain I butchered the name. Who, in the movie Lady Hawk, was once the captain of the guards until events transpired where he and his lady love were forced to flee, and then they get cursed. And the first scene you see, one of the first scenes you see him with is when he saves the audience character, Philippe the Mouse, is when he is apparently involves using his crossbow, putting a bolt in the one guy's shoulder. It's like, and everybody looks at him and it's like, Navarre? Didn't know you'd be in town. You know, and he's also good with his sword. You know, he's quite deadly with it, and as well as with his bow. And you know, and I mean, granted, the bow he's using as a crossbow, and so does everybody else. Also, all the other guards also use a crossbow. Although one could say there's a certain amount of justification for people using a crossbow more often than a longbow, and that is a longbow. It can take up to 10 years for one to be an expert with it. Crossbow? Takes maybe a week in order for you to at least learn how to shoot, learn how to use it real effectively. So there's a certain amount of justification for using that more often. Let's see here. I mean, like I said, I can see these guys using more than just their stereo. I can see all three of these guys, the mage, the archer, and the fighter, all using weapons that aren't their, quote, stereotypical weapons. In fact, I can see them possibly being better combatants overall by using these other weapons, and possibly using better armor than what they're usually depicted as wearing. And then, of course, there's the guy who figure out how to utilize all three. Woo. 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 Oh, boy. I would hate to have to deal with those guys. Well, that's it for this episode of Fantasy Reality.